Hello and welcome to another Bobby Fischer video. I had a viewer request some discussion on the Ready opening and what Siegbert Teresch thought of the Ready opening in his famous book, The Game of Chess. And as I was talking to that viewer or discussing it in the comments, the viewer mentioned this game, which I thought would be interesting. So this is from 1971 when Bobby Fischer had his match against Tigran Petrosian, the former world chess champion. And, of course, Bobby Fischer went on to win that match against Petrosian and go on to play in the World Chess Championship in 1972 and win against Spassky. But in this game, we have knight to f3 by Petrosian with the white pieces here. And this is the Ready opening. Now, in the book, The Game of Chess, which was put out in the 30s, I believe, the 1930s, by Siegbert Teresch, you have to remember that any older books that discuss openings, the theory might be outdated because there are so many decades, and especially today with computer evaluation, there's so many decades to improve upon openings and variations, with each new generation of players. So knight to f3 is played, and now we have Fischer responding with c5 here. The game, if this is played, e4, the game could go into a Sicilian defense. So the Ready opening is kind of a flexible opening that can transpose into many different possibilities. So Petrosian, he plays this b3 move, and apparently this is called the Ready opening Sicilian invitation, probably after this Sicilian-like move is played. As I mentioned, if that is pushed forward, it becomes a Sicilian. But now we have Fischer gaining more space in the center, and Petrosian follows through with his plan of fianchettoing the bishop and lining it up here through the center and towards the king side. And here's an interesting move, and apparently, this is a book move, and already black has a slight advantage, but this is just a slight edge. And I've mentioned this before. If the computer shows an edge by 0.25, here it's only 0.14. It's pretty much even. So let's see how things continue. We have a fight for the center finally, pushing c4, attacking the central pawn. And this move is played, which I believe Teresch preferred this move in the Ready opening. If the c-pawn attacks the d-pawn by pushing it forward, Fischer gains space. He can try and cramp his opponent's position. And with this f-pawn move, which generally, it can be a bad idea to push that f-pawn because you open up lines of attack possibly on the king here. But this f-pawn move allows the e-pawn to push forward as well, and Fischer will have a lot more space than his opponent. So after d3, Fischer does in fact push this pawn, and we look at this strong wedge of pawns down through the center, and it blocks this bishop. This bishop is not really doing much now, and Fischer has cramped Petrosian's position. But Petrosian was a very famous positional maneuvering player, a prophylactic player where he would try to basically stop your counterplay before it even gets started. So here he tries to give himself a little bit of room, pushing this e-pawn. The computer says that's an inaccuracy, that g3 should have been played. Then the bishop could fianchetto and we could have kingside castling. So here Fischer develops a knight. Now, the computer says this is an inaccuracy, but either way, the computer recommends an immediate knight to c6. Um, Either way, Fischer still has an edge that is building here. 3/4 to almost one pawn equivalent advantage, even though material's even at the moment. If he would have played the knight to c6 move or this move, which we'll see where this knight is headed. It's going to move here and then it'll be backed up by the other knight. So bishop develops. The knight moves to c6, unblocking this bad bishop, which is really pinned in by all these pawns on dark squares. So now we just have a series of maneuvering moves and developing moves. So knight gets off the back rank, backs up the other knight, and so the game continues with Fischer developing. Now he's ready to castle kingside. So we have castling by both sides. And now Petrosian pushes forward with e4. So this closes the center of the board, closes up the central position. The computer says that's an inaccuracy, that knight to e1 would have been better. Maybe dropping that knight back and trying to push the f pawn. Because when there's not many possibilities in the center, you have to be careful. Well, if we go back, we can take a look at this real quick. So what did the computer recommend? This move here. Now, you can't immediately push here, or there's a possibility of capture there, I guess. Maybe the knight would have to move here, defend the pawn. But if we go back to the game, we have this push closing things up. And you have to remember, at this time period, Bobby Fischer was just destroying his opponents. He was playing at the top of his game. And so Petrosian was probably trying to keep the position closed and not give Fischer many open attacking lines. So, Fischer looking for play on the flanks, because when the center's closed, the only action you can get is on the queen side or the king side, by pushing pawns. Maybe this pawn pushes here, something like this, and you'll have some attacking options. All right, the knight drops back now, the best move, freeing up this f pawn to push forward. So what does Fischer do? He gets his counterattack in first. Well, I should say his initial attack before there's a chance of pushing over here. So now, this is the best move in the position. Black still has an edge, but what does this move do? Well, he's either going to gain control of this diagonal, or, that's if this bishop avoids the trade. But here, Fischer trades off his good bishop for Petrosian's bad bishop. Now, we'll see if that makes a difference. And now, Fischer tempts Petrosian into a queen trade, which he avoids, and apparently that's the best move to avoid that. And now the game continues with some maneuvering. Excuse me. All right, so this knight is coming off the back rank. It's interesting. They both have 3 pieces on the back rank here. Because of this closed position, maneuvering and development can be a lot slower. So knight to c2. What does that do? It connects the rooks, but these rooks don't have many options because there aren't any open or half open files yet. So the game continues with the rook moving here on the B file, which that's usually a good idea if you plan to open the file. So if Fischer captures here, the rook would have a half open file. And of course, this pawn couldn't capture, or the rook could capture bishop. Although if that happened, I guess the knight could block that rook in, kind of trap it in there. But anyway, let's see what actually happens in the game. So maneuvering here, the queen is grabbing this diagonal, although Petrosian is preventing the queen from going here, but the queen could land on g6 and line up on Petrosian's king. So here we have a move that the computer says is an inaccuracy. This kind of lines up on the bishop. It's attacking this pawn. Maybe it's enticing Fischer to push forward and close things up more on the queen side. So let's see what Fischer does. He just centralizes his bishop. Now we have the knight repositioning. And so just slow maneuvering on both sides. Finally, there's a capture here. And now it's Petrosian who has the half open file. So let's see how Fischer responds. He captures towards the center, the best move in the position, and that gives Fischer a half open A file, which could come in handy. So now, the play will probably revolve around these half open files, unless, something opens up elsewhere on the board. So Fischer jumps his knight forward. Now maybe he's thinking of pushing forward here in the future. Let's see what happens. Petrosian develops his knight, an inaccuracy. Apparently, this move is preferred, but Petrosian probably didn't want to open things up here, and have this rook lined up on the bishop. But once again, I had mentioned earlier, the knight could trap that rook in if the rook captures the bishop. All right, so game continues. Fischer grabs the half open file, and now the computer says that's an inaccuracy, but at this point Fischer still has a pretty good edge. So let's see if he can build up on this edge and turn it into some type of winning advantage. The computer actually liked rook to f7 better, which could allow the rooks to double up. So the pawn pushes forward, trying to prevent the activity down this A file. So things continue with the knight attacking here, although it's defended at the moment by this pawn. So we have the queen adding to the protection here in case Fischer decides to attack with his queen, and he does. But the computer is saying that that's an inaccuracy. It would have been maybe a little bit better to centralize that queen more by going to e6. So we have a pawn push, capture, recapture, and now Petrosian is left with an isolated pawn, but it is a passed pawn, although it's blockaded by the knight at the moment. Fischer is left with this backwards pawn, so that could be a weakness. And earlier I was talking about weak squares. There is this weak square, although it's still on Petrosian's side of the board. He could possibly try and jump a knight up there, but Fischer's doing a good job using both of his knights and the queen. Everything is covering that weak square. So the game continues with c4. Fischer gets rid of his backward pawn. trying to eliminate that weakness. After capture, we have knight capture. And now the pressure is building up here. Queen and rook both attacking. Two attackers, one defender. Will Fischer knock out the bishop here? Yes, he does. So usually when there are pawns on both sides of the board, it's better to have the bishop, in a knight versus bishop endgame. Now we still have rooks and queen on the board. Petrosian does have, this advantage of the passed pawn, but we'll have to see if he can escort that up the board and turn it into a winning advantage. So attack on Petrosian's queen. So he gets behind the passed pawn. He's offering a queen trade, which Fischer cannot deny if Petrosian wants to trade queens, because Fischer's queen is pinned to the king. All right. So Fischer repositions his bishop, preparing to probably jump onto this weak square, this outpost here. And if the bishop lands here, it cannot be chased away by any pawns. It'll be protected. And the only way to get rid of it is to try and knock it out with a knight. So we have queens being traded. This does help pull Fischer's king in towards the center. And as the pieces fly off the board, it'll become important to have those kings involved in the endgame. All right. We have a check. Fischer decides to sacrifice this pawn. If Petrosian wants to go after that, in exchange for getting more king activity. So the pawn is denied. So it looks like Petrosian declines to capture. Instead, he pushes forward, maybe discouraging this pawn push. So things continue with the bishop jumping onto this outpost. The computer doesn't like that and now says this was an inaccuracy and the game is dead even. Apparently h6 would have been better to, I guess, get out of the line of fire here. And let's go back a little bit and see where Fischer started to lose his advantage. If I go back too far, we'll be way back 10 moves. So it looks like here, after these trades, this is where Fischer's advantage kind of fizzles away. All right. So instead of capturing the pawn, Petrosian pushed forward with g4. And now Fischer grabs this outpost. It does restrict the knight. The knight can't reposition here without being captured. But as I said, in a game with pawns on both sides of the board, often you want to keep that bishop. And the bishop is doing a good job here of kind of blocking the rooks so that they can't double up in the future. It's also preventing this pawn from marching forward here. So apparently this is the first, well, not the first mistake, but a mistake in the game here. Rook to a2. Looks like rook to d1. Oh, wow. They prefer rook to d1, just giving up this pawn. So I don't know. That doesn't seem so good. All right. Will the rooks be exchanged? Yes. Petrosian pushes further down into an endgame. This allows him to push his pawn forward. Fischer gets in front of that pawn, and that pawn is just moving on up the board. So, Fischer needs to do something here and stop that passed pawn. So he finally blockades it, and the king is, well, both kings are maneuvering. Looks like Fischer is finally getting ready to head over and try and go after this pawn along with his rook. So, the question is there some way that Petrosian can try and get an advantage? At the moment, Fischer has a slight edge. He brings his king up, and Fischer does likewise. So, remaneuvering by the knight. Now from here the knight could jump up here, threaten to go after the bishop. The king is targeting the pawn, so Fischer will be able to knock out this passed pawn. But now we have an attack here. So if that's captured, recapture, the king can capture here. So what should Fischer do here? According to the computer, Fischer still has an edge. So, interesting move. He drops back with the bishop, avoiding that trade. And now the knight is just kind of stuck here. It can't move forward. I guess it could go here, maybe. So the game continues with check. The king captures. And now Fischer is ahead. He's knocked out that pawn. The game is still somewhat even though Petrosian is behind. Fischer does have an edge, so let's see if he can build on that. The rook presses forward. Oh, and now Fischer targets the pawn back here, but these pawns can move to the light squares and no longer be a target. So the game continues with Fischer trying to activate his king, and for the moment his king is just stuck on the edge, which is not so great. But from here he'll be able to move his bishop up and allow his king to get back into the game. So a trade of rooks offered here. Will Fischer accept? No, he declines the trade, wanting to keep pieces on the board. We have a check, and now things may be forced. No, Fischer blocks. If his king would have moved, the rooks could have been traded. So Fischer blocks this, and now we have the rook stepping to the side, maybe looking for activity up here. The possibility of maybe swinging back. Well, he can't even do that because this dark squared bishop is doing a good job of covering things. So the rook counters. If Petrosian has this open file for his rook, Fischer grabs one of his own. Although everything is covered at the moment. So the game continues with rook stepping back. And now Fischer offers to give back a pawn in return. So let's see what happens. Petrosian declines that. Apparently rook to f7 would have been better. Moving here, attacking. So the game continues with the bishop dropping back. See how it progresses here. We have a check blocked by the bishop. So a lot of maneuvering going on here. Once again, this pawn is under attack. All right, so I'll play this out and see how it goes. We're getting down near the end here, but a lot of maneuvering going on. An interesting battle of knight versus bishop, and that bishop is just covering a lot more than the knight, even though it's a bad bishop blocked by these pawns here. But Fischer does have this passed pawn, which could be dangerous. So finally, Petrosian captures here. And Fischer's probably pretty much winning, even though material is even. Things are bad when the recommendation was actually to capture here, getting 2 pawns for that knight. So rook moves in here, where it could maybe cause trouble from the back rank. And finally, Petrosian decides to give up his knight for those 2 pawns. So we have a check. King drops back. And what now? What can Fischer do next? His king is slowly being corralled over to the king side. All right. What should Fischer do now? Well, he decides to centralize his king, and take a square away from his opponent. Petrosian pushes forward, taking this passed pawn, but Fischer is behind the passed pawn, so that pawn can no longer push forward, or else it's going to be hard to defend it with just this rook, especially if the bishop could possibly jump up here, and target it along with the rook. So, game continues. We have a check. Petrosian is running out of options here, and this is where Petrosian resigned. So, how could the game have gone on further? Petrosian doesn't want to go here, of course, or it would be a mate in 1. Now, I'll go back here in a second and look. We can see how the game could have gone, because some viewers recommended that I play out some of these endings when the masters are so good that they know what's going to happen, so they just resign before a checkmate occurs. But before I look at that, check out this game review. So Bobby Fischer played at 94% accuracy versus 89.7 by Petrosian. And Fischer played at a 2900 level versus 2550 by his opponent. Inaccuracies, we have 11 inaccuracies by Petrosian, 9 by Fischer, 3 mistakes by Petrosian. So, a lot of maneuvering in this game. We see that, Fischer just kind of got an edge and almost kept his edge for the whole game until into the end game. He just built his advantage into a win. All right, let's see. What does the computer recommend? Could go with moving the rook over here and checking. Rook to d7 check is a possibility. So if that is played, if it's saying that's one of the best, well, now it's saying that's the best move. But now this looks pretty bad. Because you're threatening mate, and this pawn is under attack. So this is how the game could have ended. Fischer would just start picking off the pawns, and it's not looking at all well for Petrosian. So if we go back, what's another option? King to f1. So If you move over here, the problem is the rook has trapped Petrosian's king, and this bishop is doing a good job as well. So, yeah, I don't think we need to go too much further into this game. You can tell with that extra bishop, it's just not looking too good. And the rook is behind the passed pawn. There's just not much Petrosian can do. All right, well, feel free to leave comments. As always, I enjoy hearing from viewers and subscribers. Like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.